Toby, I want to kind of get straight to a couple of what I think are very, very important questions. And one of the questions that I have about suicide and people that might be at risk, you mentioned earlier about kind of a checklist of signs. And so I've been wondering for a couple of weeks now I've been thinking about this podcast, some of the questions I have. And one of the questions I have, and I think a lot of people will have, is when you're interacting with somebody, are there certain signs or behaviors that in your experience you can look at and say, this is something that I might need to pay a little close attention to, or you know what I'm saying? Like what do you tell people to look for to identify if somebody might be at risk?
One thing that was prevalent with my brother was the mood swings. It was, talking one moment and left field the next. And, jokingly, I'm like, what are you, bipolar? And just saying those things because not really understanding.
And just so people know, your brother spent 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan was he in the Army or in the Marines?
He was in the Army. He was a sergeant in the Army, yes.
And he was in combat twice in Afghanistan. Oh, yeah. And so he comes back, and let me just ask you, you described the mood swings. Was he like that before he went to combat, or was this a pretty massive change?
What we have found is that there were issues before he left. This just magnified it to a whole new level. And that's where, I would just, for my own personal, I would just want to really understand what type of screening is done for those going into the service. A lot of times, years ago was when you had a bad kid, what did you do? You send them to the military. That'll straighten you out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law, my father-in-law did that exact thing to my brother-in-law. And it worked on him. And it took a little while. But
yeah, but that's what you did, right? It
Sure.
teaches you discipline. It teaches you to be a man. My brother came back. I saw the transition of him being from a boy to a man. I mean, it was just amazing to see that. But then I also saw that those issues that were there before were just magnified. So where before he may be a little moody, here, if you woke him up, he may jump up and punch you in the face because he just didn't know where he was.
Yeah.
So, I think that screening process of more than just a number, because we have to meet our quota to recruit, is, are you really screening them to see those pre-existing conditions, so to speak? The other thing is, depression, a lot of people, it's evident, people that are spending more time sleeping, or now they can't sleep. It's kind of one or the other. Eating binges or lack of eating, excessive weight gain or weight loss, a loss of desire to do some basic things that used to be the norm. And, you have to understand is a lot of times people aren't going to outright and tell you, oh, I'm depressed, because a lot of times they don't realize that they are. 81% of people that succumb to suicide, they've left some type of sign or warning. There's been something, a cry out for help, but a lot of times we don't want to step on someone's toes, or we're embarrassed, or, oh, I'm not sure, I'm not a doctor. And it's like, no, get them help before. I wish I could have done all, and I did actually try to do all those things. And hence that's how the book is called The Last 7 Days That I Spent with My Brother. But if I knew now, if I know now what I knew if back then, oh my gosh, even as much as I helped it would have been a whole new level, because I'm more armored up with that information.
I love, so that's a really important point. I think there are people, and I would maybe even include myself in this group, at least years ago, they're just kind of afraid to say anything. I mean, they're, like you said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to get involved. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. And in a situation like this, it seems to me pretty clear that you need to err on the side of action, right? I mean, if there's a question in your mind and somebody is struggling, don't be afraid to reach out and try to help. And for people that are just listening to the podcast and not watching on YouTube, I've got a Veterans Crisis Line phone number behind me. And if you go to keepourtroopsalive.org, you've got a bunch of resources too. But the point is, the resources are out there. I'm not sure that the problem is that we don't have enough resources. It's just that sometimes people that are in this condition, they just don't want to use the resources. I mean, you know what I mean? It's a little bit of a dilemma. If you're depressed, it's hard to get the energy up to reach out and get yourself help.
Exactly. And, I think it's varying also because, those from the military, when my brother passed away at the wake, there were so many servicemen coming through and they were hurting. They were battered, of course, because they lost, their brother, but just in general. And he was number 7 in their platoon that had committed suicide.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. Yeah.
Number 7, and that was 8 years ago. So who knows what that count, if that had increased. And what they told us was, you're trained that you need to toughen up. You're trained to be desensitized to a lot of things because you're going to war to kill people. You're going, and they're not telling you you're going to war that will include children and women that are being killed also. So when you learn to mask all of those feelings and basically numb yourself, when they come back and they start feeling something uncomfortable, often what they do, they try to numb themselves. Yeah. And a lot of times that can be through drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be through sleep, it could be eating again. I mean, there's so many things.
Violence some of the time. Yeah.
And then the other part was that many of them told us that when they came back, they were messed up, but they were told as they go through a screening to be released is this is what you say if you want to go see your wife, your children again. So it's kind of, no, I'm okay because I want to see my wife, my children, but I'm really not okay. And then they're put back in society where they're embarrassed of the things they've had to do and they're reliving those images over and over and over again. And how's that a conversation to have with your significant other? Oh, I killed 20 people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's very isolating. And then the brotherhood comes when now I'm going to drink with the men and women that were there with me, but alcohol is a depressant. So then that even makes it worse. So it's just a vicious cycle.